Pull out a map from 1531. Any serious cartographer from that era, Orontius Finaeus, Gerardus Mercator, Felipe Boache, do not look at Europe or Asia. Look south. Look all the way south, past the tip of South America, past the edge of what any sailor in 1531 had ever reached by ship. What you will find there will not make sense. You will find Antarctica clearly drawn, accurately shaped, with coastlines, river systems, and mountain ranges running through its interior, and not a single flake of ice anywhere on it. Now, here is the part that keeps researchers up at night. The official discovery of Antarctica was in 1820. Europeans did not reach it until then, according to every history textbook you have ever read. But here are cartographers drawing it in the 1500s with a level of geographic detail that took modern satellite technology to confirm. And on every single one of those maps, the continent is green, temperate, habitable, as if someone had been there, as if someone had mapped it from the ground. Then something changes. Somewhere between 1600 and 1700, the maps start to shift. The green begins to fade. The coastlines get buried. And by the time European explorers officially discover the continent in the 19th century, it is a frozen wasteland under 2 miles of ice, a continent that cannot support life, a continent that, according to science, has been frozen for at least 15 million years. But the maps say otherwise, and the maps are older than the ice. This is not a fringe theory from a conspiracy forum. Charles Hapgood's Finaeus map of 1531 was studied by cartographers at the United States Air Force in 1960, and their conclusion was uncomfortable. The map showed geographic features of Antarctica that were not confirmed until 1958 during the International Geophysical Year features that could only be mapped from above or from the ground by someone who was there when the land was free of ice. Charles Hapgood, a professor at Keene State College in New Hampshire, spent years analyzing these maps and concluded that they were copies of far older source documents that no longer exist, documents from a civilization that mapped the world before the ice came. Who were they? That is the question that leads us into territory most historians refuse to enter. Let us stay with the maps for a moment, because the detail matters. The Piri Reis map of 1513 is probably the most famous of the pre-Columbian world maps that shows Antarctica. Piri Reis was an Ottoman admiral and cartographer. He did not invent this map, he compiled it. He wrote in the margins of the original document that he assembled his map from 20 older source charts, some of which dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. He was not the explorer. He was the editor, and the source material he was working from showed Antarctica without ice, connected to South America by what appears to be a land bridge, with a coastline that matches the subglacial topography of Queen Maud Land within a few degrees of modern surveying accuracy. This was confirmed in 1960 when the map was sent to the Hydrographic Office of the United States Navy. Captain Lorenzo Burrows, chief of the cartographic section, wrote an official letter back to Hapgood. His words were precise. The map agrees with the results of the seismic profile made across the top of the ice cap by the Swedish, British, Norwegian Antarctic expedition of 1949. This means the original source for the Piri Reis map was drawn before the ice was there. The Navy said this, not a YouTuber. The Navy. Now we enter the Tartaria problem. If you have spent any time in the alternative history community, you have encountered Tartaria. The idea, stripped of its most extreme claims, is essentially this. There existed, sometime before the 18th century, a global civilization of extraordinary sophistication that has been deliberately scrubbed from the historical record. The name Tartaria, or Tartary, appears on European maps consistently from the 15th through the 18th centuries, referring to a vast empire stretching from Eastern Europe across Central Asia and into Siberia. By 1800, It had essentially disappeared from the maps, not conquered, not absorbed, but gone, replaced by Russia on one side and the Qing dynasty on the other, with no clear account of how this transition occurred or what happened to the Tartarian people. The maps do not lie. Old maps show Tartary as a major political entity. Encyclopaedia Britannica from 1771 has a lengthy entry on independent Tartary, describing its cities, government and people. By the 1800 edition, that entry is gone. The cities are gone. The people are reclassified. It is as if an editor went through history with a very large eraser. The connection to Antarctica is this. Tartaria researchers argue that the civilization responsible for the pre-ice maps of Antarctica was the same global civilization referenced in the Tartaria narrative, a civilization with advanced cartographic knowledge, possibly with access to aerial or satellite-level surveying methods that mapped the entire Earth, including its southern pole. Its history, they argue, was systematically erased during or after a catastrophic event, most likely dated to the late 1700s or early 1800s, roughly coinciding with the mud flood theory and the rewriting of world history associated with the Napoleonic period. That last part is where it becomes harder to verify. But the maps are real. That part is not in dispute. Let us go back to Gerardus Mercator. His 1569 world map, the one that gave us the Mercator projections still used in classrooms today, shows a southern continent. Mercator was not guessing. He was working from source material. In his 1595 atlas, he included a detailed map of the Arctic and Antarctic regions that showed geographic features with a precision that baffled 20th-century scholars. His Arctic map showed 4 rivers converging at the North Pole, flowing from land masses. His southern continent showed mountain ranges and river deltas. Where was he getting this? He never sailed to either pole. Neither did anyone he knew. He was compiling from older sources, just like Piri Reis, just like Orontius Finaeus. The question of sources is the central mystery. Every cartographer admits they are working from older maps. Those older maps do not exist anymore, or, if they do, perhaps they are sitting in archives that are not accessible to the general public. The Library of Alexandria is the most famous example of a repository of ancient knowledge that was destroyed. But Alexandria was not the only library. The Library of Pergamon held hundreds of thousands of scrolls. The libraries of the Aztec civilization were burned by Spanish priests. The libraries of the Islamic Golden Age were destroyed during the Mongol invasion of Baghdad in 1258. Someone, across many centuries and many continents, has been very thorough about eliminating source material. What remains are the copies, the Piri Reis, the Orontius Finaeus, the Mercator, the Boache map of 1754, which is perhaps the most troubling of all, because Philippe Boache drew Antarctica divided into 2 separate land masses with an open sea between them. In the 1950s, seismic surveys confirmed that, under the ice, Antarctica is indeed divided into 2 separate land masses by a subglacial sea. Boache drew this in 1754 with no way to verify it, no drill, no sonar, no satellite. And he was right. How? The Tartaria answer is that he had access to source maps drawn by a civilization that was physically present on that continent before the ice formed. A civilization that was sophisticated enough to conduct the kind of systematic geographic survey that produces accurate continental maps. And the implication that follows, the implication that historians refuse to engage with seriously, is that this civilization was operating at a technological level we do not credit to any known ancient culture. Here is where mainstream science pushes back, and it is worth engaging with that pushback honestly. The scientific consensus is that Antarctica has been frozen for approximately 34 million years, with a brief warmer period around 15 million years ago, and another possible warm period in the last million years associated with Milankovitch cycles. Under this framework, there is no window of time in which a human civilization could have walked the surface of Antarctica, mapped its rivers and mountains, and then had that information survive to 1513 in the form of source documents. But there is a counter-argument, and it comes from within mainstream geology. Charles Hapgood's Earth crust displacement theory, which received a letter of support from Albert Einstein in 1953, suggests that the outer crust of the Earth can shift relative to the mantle beneath it, repositioning continents relative to the poles without requiring full-scale continental drift that takes millions of years. Under this model, Antarctica could have been positioned far enough from the South Pole to have a temperate climate within the last 12,000 years. The ice would have formed rapidly following the crustal shift, explaining why the maps show a green continent and why the ice appears suddenly in the geological record at the end of the last ice age. Einstein's support for Hapgood does not prove the theory, but it does mean that the theory was taken seriously by serious people. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis adds another layer. Around 12,800 years ago, something catastrophic happened to the Earth. Evidence is now appearing in geological layers on every continent. A layer of platinum, iridium, and shocked quartz, the signature of a major impact event, appears in sediment cores dated to approximately 10,800 BC. This event is associated with the extinction of megafauna across North America, the rapid refreezing after the brief warming of the Bulling-Alarud period, and possibly the end of whatever advanced civilization produced the source maps that Piri Reis and Mercator were copying. If a global civilization existed before 10,800 BC, a major impact event would have reset the clock. The survivors would have kept whatever knowledge they could, and over the following millennia, fragments of that knowledge would have been copied and recopied until they arrived, barely legible and imperfectly understood, in the hands of Ottoman admirals and Flemish cartographers. This is the version of the story that does not require a shadowy cabal actively suppressing the truth. The erasure was not necessarily deliberate. It was the natural result of catastrophe, followed by millennia of degradation. Libraries burned, coastlines changed, languages died. The knowledge survived in fragments misunderstood, mislabeled, copied by people who did not fully comprehend what they were copying. But then comes the 19th century, and this is where the Tartarian researchers make their strongest argument, because the erasure of Tartary from the maps and encyclopedias is not catastrophic erasure. It is bureaucratic erasure. It is the careful, systematic reclassification of a political entity that was still on maps in 1771 and gone by 1800. That is not a civilization destroyed by a comet. That is a civilization removed from the record by people with pens and printing presses. And the timing is suspicious, because the 1800s are also when European powers began the systematic exploration and colonization of the last unmapped regions of the Earth: Africa, Central Asia, the Pacific, and Antarctica. What if the reason Antarctica was officially undiscovered until 1820 was not that no one had been there? What if it was that someone needed to officially discover it? Because once you officially discover something, you control the narrative of what is found there. And whatever was frozen under that ice, whatever structures or artifacts or remnants of the civilization that mapped those coastlines before the ice came, would be recovered under official auspices, classified, and removed from public knowledge before the general population could ask any inconvenient questions. This is speculation, but it is the kind of speculation that becomes harder to dismiss when you look at what has been found in Antarctica and what has not been released. The continent has been under international treaty since 1959, limiting military activity and supposedly guaranteeing freedom of scientific research. But there are portions of Antarctica that are restricted. Lake Vostok, buried under 2 miles of ice in East Antarctica, was drilled into by Russian scientists in the early 2000s. The results of that drilling have never been fully published. When the drill first broke through, the water that had been sealed under ice for what scientists estimated was 20 million years rushed upward. That water would carry whatever was in the lake. The results classified. A 2016 satellite survey identified what appeared to be anomalous structures beneath the ice in certain regions of Antarctica. These are not definitive. Ice does strange things. Geology creates formations that look artificial. But the fact that follow-up surveys have not been published, and that several of the regions in question are specifically excluded from zones of free scientific access under the Antarctic Treaty, is the kind of absence of evidence that alternative researchers point to when they argue that the silence itself is informative. And here is the thing that is hardest to shake. Every map drawn before 1700 shows Antarctica as a real, detailed, ice-free landmass. No cartographer from that period describes it as hypothetical. They draw it with the same confidence they draw Europe. They give it river systems. They give it mountain ranges. They give it bays and peninsulas that satellite imagery has confirmed exist under the ice. And then, in the exact historical window when European civilization is consolidating power globally, when the major colonial empires are drawing the definitive maps that we still teach from Antarctica, becomes terra incognita, unknown, unexplored, empty. The ice appeared on the maps at the same time Tartaria disappeared from them. That may be coincidence. The world is full of coincidences. But researchers who have spent years comparing map timelines, cross-referencing encyclopedic records, and tracing the genealogy of source documents that cartographers themselves admitted they were copying are not satisfied with coincidence as an explanation. The honest summary is this. There are genuine anomalies in pre-modern cartography that have been confirmed by modern science. The Piri Reis map shows subglacial coastlines. The Boachi map shows subglacial topography. The Orontius Finaeus map was verified by the United States Navy. These are not fabrications. These are not misreadings. These are documented cases of impossible accuracy in maps drawn by people who could not possibly have gathered that information themselves by any conventional means. The explanation for this accuracy requires either that someone with advanced geographic knowledge existed before the ice, or that someone with advanced geographic knowledge exists now and has been selectively leaking information backward through history, through planted documents. And neither of those explanations is comfortable. Neither fits cleanly into the history we were taught. What changed after 1700 is not fully explained by mainstream history. The disappearance of Tartary is not fully explained. The sudden appearance of Antarctica as a frozen and lifeless wilderness after centuries of maps showing it as habitable land is not fully explained. The maps existed before the ice. That much is demonstrable. Everything else is the question. If you want to go deeper on what the maps from the Tartaria-era cartographers show about the cities that no longer exist, that breakdown is in the next video. Subscribe so you do not miss it.